Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. This ISBA webinar is on the title of, it's an update from Mark Steed about returning to normality. Many of you may have been with us when we had Mark speaking to us a few weeks ago. Feels like a long time, but Mark's coming back to tell us what's happening in his Kellett School this week. My name is Emmy Dean-Lewis, and just before I hand over to our host, I'd like to cover a couple of housekeeping points. For those of you who may not have used this platform before, you'll see the slide, but I'd like to draw your attention to the attendee controls that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. The first little circles there, the first one, which is red for you, is because you've been muted as you've come into the call. We've got lots of people online today, so we're just trying to reduce background noise. The next button, which is blue there, because I've clicked on it, in this example, will show you the participant list. When you click on that, you'll see in the bar on the right-hand side of your screen a list of the panelists. You'll see John Murphy there, who's about to speak, and Mark, who's going to be presenting. Plus, you'll be able to see how many attendees there are, and if you click on View All Attendees, you'll be able to see the list of attendees. The next button is the chat button, and if you click on that, it'll go blue and appear in your right-hand panel. And there you'll see messages from my colleague Tessa, who's posting logistics and other helpful information. And then the next one I'd like to bring to your attention is the Q&A button. If you don't see the little question mark there to click on, it will be inside the three dots, the Q&A panel. And we'd encourage you to put your questions in there. We're hoping to have time for questions at the end of Mark's presentation. But if we don't, we'll make sure to follow up with you afterwards. So please do put any questions that you may have or that occur to you while you're listening to Mark. So with that, I'm going to hand over to John to introduce our speaker. John.
Emmy, thank you very much. I am absolutely delighted to be able to welcome Mark back to another one of these webinars. If you recall, the first one, which happened just after the closure of schools was announced in the United Kingdom, acted as something of a reference work for a lot of schools trying to pick their way through what seemed to be an absolutely impossible situation. And now we're beginning to see the end of this, perhaps, with a return planned for or about the 1st of June. Now is a very good time to have an update from Mark and see how his thinking and ours can perhaps be taken on in parallel, and maybe if there's some ideas that we can draw one from another. So really it's going to be an update and a focus on his comments from last time. And I, for one, I'm very much looking forward to it. Mark, the floor is yours.
It's great to be back with you all again. I think I last spoke on the 26th of February, so it's about a couple of months ago now. So we've learned quite a lot's happened in that time. Obviously, things have changed hugely in the UK. So this is a sort of progress report. So I'm going to pick up from, so in a sense, and give an update on some of the things I spoke about last time, but just taking them a little bit further. And then I'm really going to focus on the planning and thinking that we've put in place here to get back open again, and to sort of share some of the ideas and so on. And I hope they're helpful to you. A sort of bit of a background, and really about Hong Kong, and I think this is sort of offered as a sort of caveat at the beginning of it. I mean, Hong Kong has coped with the virus unbelievably well. I mean, we're on the doorstep of China, very, very close. We had an open border with China for the first 3-4 weeks of this, and certainly all the way through January and into February. In total, I think actually today, to date, we've got 1,050 cases, most of which have come from outside Hong Kong. We've only got four deaths within the whole period, and we've not gone into full lockdown. So I'm very fortunate. I live within walking distance of 6 very good restaurants and bars. So none of those has been closed during the time. It has limited how many people we can have at the table, but things are very, very different. We've only had 3 locally transmitted cases in the last 3 weeks, and actually people are really quite upset by those. So it is a very different picture. And I think the reason for that is because Hong Kong learned this enormous amount of lessons from SARS in 2003, probably in the way that the UK is going to learn lessons from this episode. I'll just give you one practical example. Schools in Hong Kong have to have automatic taps and automatic soap. It's sort of, on a normal day, it sort of looks like a sort of rather, wonderful luxury to have, a nice to have. But actually, in the context of virus control, if you think about the process, you turn a tap on, you wash your hands, you sort of hit the soap dispenser, then you touch the tap again. So you're sort of slightly back to square one. So these small things are probably measures that UK will pick up in due course. And so any school in Hong Kong has to have automatic taps and so on. And that's the sort of, so structurally we're there, and also in terms of the whole mindset in terms of masks. So here at Kellett, the last teaching day was on the 24th of January. We then went on Chinese New Year, and we've had, by the time we open again next Wednesday and we start the phased opening, we have had 15 weeks of homeschooling plus a 2-week Easter break. So we have had a really, really long go at this, and it has been a really testing time for a whole community, whether that's students, staff, or especially for parents who have had to take on a much greater role than they normally do. So it's been quite a sort of journey through. So the good news for us was on the 5th of May, the sort of light at the end of the tunnel was there, and we really are into the end game of preparing for a group of our students to come back from next Wednesday. So, and a lot of negotiations gone on around that, a lot of discussion, a lot of debates in Hong Kong. But we're, I think, in quite a good place. So I hope that I can help you by sharing some of that thinking from a country that I think is really very queued up and tuned in to the safety around these sorts of viruses. So I want to sort of really give an update on student wellbeing. I mean, one of the things I said in the last talk was that I thought that actually doing student questionnaires was a really important thing. So I thought I'd share a couple of ours with you. This was our one in week 3 in terms of students self-reporting in terms of their well-being. And this is the follow-up in week 6. What we did when we did these questionnaires was that we then followed up on any student who had a score of less than 5. So every student who self-reported at having a score of 1, 2, 3, 4 would have a personal phone call from one of the wellbeing team. They would have a counselling session, and some of them actually set up ongoing counselling for that small group of students who were really struggling. The interesting one of our more recent ones is in week 10, and this was the week after the Easter break. But more importantly, it was after the announcement that the A-levels and the GCSE exams had been cancelled, and that there were going to be different regulations. And that was quite a source of anxiety, and to some extent is for some members of the school. That anxiety around exam results is one of those sort of key pinch points that people have been worried about. And the worries now particularly around our lower sixth, our year 12, and the grades that they would have got in their AS levels, because we have AS levels still internationally, and whether they're going to, and how they're going to go about applying to university next year. So we've done a whole range of wellbeing initiatives, and I spoke about these in the last one, so I won't spend much time on this, but we have done quite a lot of important wellbeing has been at the heart of what we've done throughout this. With what we realised early on was that transmitting information was relatively straightforward. It really is easy to tell students, get information there. And in fact, some of our preps after 15 weeks have actually gone through the lion's share of their curriculum for the year. They've actually got through content much faster because the day hasn't got all the other things in it that sort of take up time, like sport and games and getting changed and lunchtimes and so on. There's been a much more sort of focused, much greater focus on the academic side from home learning. And so actually people have got through syllabuses at a much greater rate. And that's also true of our seniors. In the secondary, we've had a whole range of wellbeing activities, and they continue on. I mentioned last time the open mic competitions. It's great fun. where we actually had people, got students involved, live streaming on a YouTube channel and broadcast in that way. So that's always, that was a very successful part of what we're doing, and it's something we've continued to do. So just to sort of recap really on the lessons that we learned there. I mean, the normal lessons, the normal issues are still there, and I think as you come out of the virus, I think the fact that people have got relations who have got cancer, or they've lost someone, or those sort of issues that we deal with on a normal basis, they are still there. And those students need supporting, and staff need supporting through those difficult times. And people who have got, and particularly as there has been this sort of dislocation and this inability to actually go and see people. For us internationally, that's on an enormous scale, because I mean, some people literally cannot move countries. My daughter lives in New Zealand, and she cannot leave New Zealand because she will lose her visa and they won't let her back in. So there are real complications around the world, and people have got family and relations dislocated. The second one is that the issues, and I think we're looking at these differently now, and I'm going to come on to it when we talk about opening, is that some people have really enjoyed being home learning. They prefer home learning. For other people, and so not everybody has been a negative, and so that has a whole complexity which I think we're going to face going forward. And then there are, of course, the coronavirus related issues. So there are obviously, sorry, there's obviously the medical ones. Financially is obviously going to really be a big impact. People losing their jobs, people losing their businesses, their livelihoods. There may be furlough arrangements in place, there may be transitional support, but there is going to be a long-term impact, and schools are going to have to cope with that, and people can see that. And as you come out of it, people are thinking about those things all the more, because it's, in a sense, the support comes to an end. All those family events. I mean, I've got two children. So our children this summer were meant to be getting married. Their weddings have been cancelled. There's this great backlog. When people have got anxiety around when will they get married? Will they get married? Will elderly relations still be alive when the wedding is reorganised? And all those anxieties around that. And then there's those who are isolated and those who've got cabin fever. And I can tell you, after 15 weeks of cabin fever, the prospect of not being able to leave Hong Kong, there are people who are really, really suffering in terms of sort of they've had enough of their families and their children, and we'll be very pleased to hand them back over to us next week, I'm sure. So just looking a little bit at home learning, I mean, obviously everyone's got up and running about this, so I'm not going to spend much time on it, but obviously we're doing live teaching through Zoom, and we're trying to put touch points into the day, and we're doing parent-teacher meetings and all those sorts of things. And the same is really going on in secondary. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time there, but I do want to say a little bit more about what we did with our timetable, because we realised quite early on, week 3 from our student questionnaire, that it really wasn't working doing a whole day and trying to fit the normal school timetable into the day. And I think if the home learning programme goes on in the UK, you'll probably get to this point. So I thought I'd spend just a couple of minutes talking about what we did. We usually have 6 50-minute lessons in our senior school. And we turned them all into 40-minute lessons and put them all into the mornings. And then we moved all the sort of more general stuff like assemblies and games lessons and all these sorts of things into the afternoon. It was a relatively easy rewrite of the timetable to get that. I'll say that, but my timetable would probably tell a slightly different story. But he managed to do it within hours rather than weeks. And so we made that transition, and that has helped our community enormously, because what it means is families can take exercise together rather than trying to fit, the child in year 3 having it at 10 o'clock and the child in year 7 having it at 12 o'clock. So all of those sort of things. So it became more coherent. Also became more coherent for the teachers, because they were doing all their Zoom lessons in the morning, and that gave them time to do preparation and marking in the afternoon. And that's really quite important. That there wasn't quite intensity during the working day for the teachers, but also for the parents. I mean, the parents is really welcome. And I know people sit there at home sort of thinking, oh gosh, surely we've got to deliver the whole day curriculum. Parents will get to the point where the strain of supporting learning, particularly with younger children, over a 6-hour period is just too much. And having to sit them down and give the attention spans for children to do a Zoom is really difficult. So, I would move to this model of sort of contact in the morning. And if you're going to set activities, set looser-based activities in the afternoon, because I think that's a really helpful sort of aspect. And we found that really helped us carry people with us at every level. The students' questionnaire was a really important part. So as we saw, the student questionnaire was about a third of the students didn't like, weren't coping with, which is quite a high number. So moving forward with the new structure, we messaged it through. We've done all our sort of sensitive messaging through using video. So we made a very good video. There's the link there. I'll make the slides available, but that link will let you see a bit more detail about what we did, but it'll also give you detail about how we messaged it to parents. But actually, the end of the day, we've reduced the number of people who preferred the old structure down to 12%. And bear in mind that we live in a sort of, we have a small constituency of sort of tiger parents within our community. I suspect there are those who really value the idea of their child doing sort of 6 hours, at the grindstone. But the vast majority didn't, and so that's really worked very, very well. Just moving sort of briefly on to staff wellbeing, because I think this is very important as well. Carrying the staff with us through this period is quite a challenge. We've done a staff wellbeing survey. It's really simple in terms of what we can do. The question is a really simple question. How do you rate your wellbeing? And we got similar sorts of results in terms of, and took a similar approach. We followed up with those who self-reported under 5, and that was the wellbeing survey from 27th of March. This is the one which we did on the 5th of May, which was after the Easter break. So, that people had regrouped. The way things fell in Hong Kong is we had Easter break, and then we actually were back for a full week, and then a 3-day week, and we had a sort of 4-day weekend, a bit like some sort of bank holiday weekend. And we did the survey after that. People were sort of back to what are probably much more normal levels of well-being. One of the things we realised we didn't do, and we should do, and we will continue to do going forward from this, is we really don't know what the baseline well-being is for our school. In terms of, it might well be the 5th of May might actually be about as good as it ever gets. They've had a good break at that point, and there's that sort of sense of getting towards the end of things. Having a baseline is really important. I think these touch points and this sort of surveying of students and staff on wellbeing is something that really is very important. And we've also continued, even though we've been sort of locked down. Well, not quite in lockdown, certainly not working from school. We've run a sort of fortnightly pub quiz, and people across the organisation have put teams together. We're all very good at this tech now. So the Quizmaster's on YouTube. The teams are connected by have a little Zoom group going, and they submit their answers on the Google form. Really simple formula, and Chris is an absolute star. Who's putting all this together and driving it all forward. And as you can see, has a very suitable virtual background for his Zoom. So just turning then to looking at our approach to return. I think that you've got to bear in mind that within your community you're going to have totally different, polar opposite views within the community on coming back. There'll be people who are sort of totally risk averse, and this is a picture of lunchtime in Wuhan after their school return. It's not actually sort of a Kellett photo, but it does give you one extreme of social distancing, for mealtime, and then the sort of, the more sort of, oh well, it's all over, we're all back to school, and so on. And this community will be reflected amongst the student body. There'll be students who are risk averse, and there are students who are just totally gung ho and will be all wanting to hug each other and do all that sort of stuff. And then there will be in the school teaching community, there will be those who will be very worried about the fact that they're going to have students in their classroom and they've got to be back in school into a sort of more public space than they've spent their time. And there'll also be, but there'll be other people going, God, it's all over, it's safe, the risk, particularly here in Hong Kong. I mean, the chances, the statistical chances of catching it here are, really, really low. And I think this is where it will be a very different picture in the UK. The UK will almost certainly go back to school with much, much higher risk levels. And so, do take this advice, within the context in which you yourself are working. So we're actually going for, I think, quite an aggressive return to school. We're allowed to come back. It needs to be phased. We've taken the view that we can get 5 and 6 back onto our prep sites, just to get back into the swing of having students in. That's on next Wednesday. We took the view of putting 7, 8, 9 and 10 in because they haven't had any contact. We had 11 and 12 in doing exam preparation. Even though the school was closed, we were able to do a small amount of contact. So, yeah, and the 11 and 12s have already moved on to their Year 12 and Year 13 work respectively. So they're sort of ahead of the game, whereas actually the priority is getting some of these Key Stage 3 Year 10 groups back, making sure they're back in the swing of things, making sure there aren't gaps, because obviously, certainly the Year 10s are going to be facing the challenge of GCSEs as far as we know. And then bring back 3 and 4 and 11 and 12. So that gets all of our seniors. At this point, I don't know whether we're going to be back full days or part days. It may well be that we do one with senior and one with prep, and it's social distancing is much more complicated in older buildings, and it's much more complicated in with younger children. We have a fantastic brand new site, and we have an enormous amount of space on the Kowloon, one of our campuses, Kowloon Bay campus. Our older population has much more complications. So we've got to find a way forward there as an organisation. We hope we can get reception back. But I mean, all the indications are that the government won't let us do that. But that's in a sense what we're planning for, and sort of hoping for the best. And I think if there's one takeaway from what I say today, it'll be that it's important that people feel safe. It's not just, I mean, here coming back in practice, they are going to be very safe. But I think visible signs that the school has taken steps to ensure safety are actually really important. If your cleaning staff are going through doing all the cleaning in the day, after school, and then people come in, there's nothing visible. I mean, your site might be perfectly safe, but there's nothing visible about it. So I think there is important to have visible signs of the fact that you are taking people's safety very, very seriously. And one of the ways in which we've sort of done that is to put we've invested in a thermal imaging camera. This has got two functions. One is it's a really efficient way of getting people into the school, taking their temperature, because using a temperature gun to the in the forehead, which is the sort of normal way, involves queuing up, it involves close contact with students, and it's time consuming. We're trying to get a busload of kids arrives in one go, and you want to get them into school and dispersed as quickly as possible. So we've invested in a thermal imaging camera. I know, being bursars, you're going to ask what the specification was, so I've put it on the screen. You want to know how much it costs, so I've put that on the screen. You can put a website. We can get it. I'm not on commission here at all. It's just the one, but I know what happens because you will ask me the question. because that's the bursar's question. But as far as I'm concerned, buying a thermal imaging camera for both sites that I've got is really investment worth it in terms of practicalities of getting the students onto site, but also giving a visible sign that we're taking people's safety very seriously, that we are not going to let anybody on site who has done it. And as you can see from the image there, it reads the image, it gives the temperature, it gives a green box. I didn't have anyone who could go red, obviously, because they wouldn't be in school. But it actually, the system takes a photograph of the person and captures that image if somebody is over 37.2. It's 37.5 to be in school in Hong Kong. So we gave ourselves a bit of a threshold there. So that sort of thing, I think, is a really useful thing. It's practical. It enhances safety, but it's also highly visible. And as you can see, we've sort of cordoned an area off, so you actually have to come through the sort of window that works, and it works really well with multiple people coming through at the same time. It's really very, very efficient. And then, I mean, there's a whole range of other things. Obviously, travel and health declarations are very, very important. And so we've created a Google form, which we've sent home to all the parents, or sending home to all the parents, so they have to make declarations around it. And that will also include declarations that there's no one in the household who are actually in quarantine, doing home quarantine. So I'll come on to sort of social distancing in a moment, but it's really sort of the degrees of separation of who's at on school site. But we have to have those declarations. Those declarations have to be done in advance, and the Google form is the easiest way to do it. In Hong Kong, we will all wear masks all the time, and that is going to be a challenge. We've already been discussing how easy it is to teach with a mask on. Obviously, it poses a particular problem for languages and teaching phonics, and sort of the verbal and linguistic skills is going to be a particularly difficult area. But I think that all the advice here is it's masks on all the time, and it's about school leaders modelling that. So I have to remember to put my mask on when I sort of leave my office. Obviously, in one's own office, if one's in a sort of individual space, one's own classroom, when one's just in the marking, it's not necessarily an issue, but it's when students are there. Parents are required to do temperature checks before the school, but you're looking at getting social distancing on busing is a particular challenge. So we need the parents to check the children's temperature before they get on the bus. They mustn't let them on without that. We've got sort of bus nannies on the bus. They have to wear masks. We'll try and space the children out as best we can. It is going to be a real challenge around the busing. But probably we'll space them out more than they get on the MTR and the public transport. So also in class, I mean, the recommendation here is 1 metre and all students facing forwards. I mean, in practice, this is actually quite difficult to do across the piece. We've got guidelines, specific guidelines for art and DT and children's play, sort of toys and things, about sanitising twice during the day, not sharing equipment, minimising how much people share equipment. We're going to use exam desks quite significantly in order to change out some of the furniture, because obviously exam desks aren't going to be used this time. I think you have to get creative in terms of reconfiguring classrooms. It's all going to look very Victorian for a while, but I think that is a way to sort of exercise it. And it is a challenge if you've got old-fashioned class. I'm picturing many a prep school that I've visited, in my time running schools in the UK, and I'm thinking, God, some of these, are basically old, they're converted houses, and social distancing in those sort of contexts are going to be particularly challenging. I know the situation in Denmark was they ended up splitting classes. That's particularly difficult. Social distancing meetings quite easy to do. using lecture theatres and so on. We've refitted our dining hall in this way so that with meal times we've got that this is a real high risk area. So we've followed the norm of restaurants. So we've got tables 2 meters apart, 4 to a table, which is the rule for restaurants. And then I think you've got to sort of go through the hand washing and sanitisation thing. So I think these are all big issues. Sorry, I skipped over sport there. Sport, non-contact sport. So think about how you can do it. I mean, athletics can work, but again, there's a masks issue and keeping distance. But it will be a challenge. I think with our younger ones, they're going to do a lot of yoga at this rate, so they're not moving around a lot. We know where they are and they're separated. I shared this before. This is a sort of grid around who to let into school in terms of degrees of separation. So I think that where we are is that we're not going to allow someone into if you've met someone who has been tested or is in quarantine, then you're not allowed into school. So if somebody comes back into Hong Kong from, say, the UK, or a parent has been on a business trip and comes back in and is quarantining, then the child in that house wouldn't be allowed in because that parent could have it. So they would be 2 degrees of separation. And obviously, if you then end up with a case, the whole thing shuffles across, and people that came into contact with those children are then into a situation of not coming into school. Again, I'll make this available. It's on that slide. Maybe a useful index and hopefully a coherent way of deciding whom you're going to allow on site, and that can drive the permissions document that you use. So just sort of a few issues that we're anticipating on the term. I think there's going to be a huge readjustment to working in school again. We've had the staff back this week, 3 days a week, and had them in to sort of, we've been busing them in on school buses. We've got a couple of days next week when they're going to have to get themselves in the normal way, travel to work on their own. So I think there's going to be real adjustment to working at school for staff, and there'll be all the anxiety that I was talking about. There'll also be a real adjustment to working at school for some students, and we're particularly concerned about the vulnerable group who are really enjoying being sort of the home learning experience, because all that sort of anxiety of going to school that they normally have has been sort of taken away from them. So that will be a real area. I think we're going to have a lot of wellbeing issues around that. I think there's going to be concerns around reopening from parents, whether it's too soon, too late, and this sort of risk-averse versus gung-ho approach. There's definitely going to be a range within the community of parental concerns around the whole school return. I think there's also going to be a sort of sense of euphoria and relief, with having the children back at school. Parents have really struggled, and I think it's challenged the sort of parent-child relationship in certain cases where, I think they've found the whole difficulty of sort of supervising their child or trying to get their child to engage with home learning has been a struggle in some cases. And with that will morph in time. We anticipate into a concern about progress, and there'll be all that sort of, did I do a good enough job as a parent, and all that sort of, in terms of have I let my child down here, and so on. And I think, the school's going to have to play a very reassuring role of saying, look, we will get them all there. I mean, we can catch up. To use my marathon analogy, I mean, we're not going to sort of suddenly try and sprint to catch you. If you fall over in a race, I'm thinking of the sort of great Lassie Veering race in the 70s where he fell over, but gradually sort of caught the pack up and then went through to win the European Championships. That race, that's the sort of approach. We're going to have to just catch the pack up slowly. It can't be a big sprint. It may involve setting some work this summer, but I think we've just got to help these children, just give reassurance to parents that we will get them all to the right level by the right time, but it's not going to be a big rush. And I think there's also going to be this sense of loss, the idea that we've lost events, we've lost rituals, we've lost weddings, we've lost farewells, we've lost graduations in school, and somehow we're going to have to try and fill that space. I mean, we are really hoping that we can have a Year 13 leavers event, because we didn't have this coming. I know some schools in the UK managed to do them just before they broke up before Easter. And they knew when the last day would be, and they could quickly throw something together. We didn't have that. We were on holiday when we were told in January. So we're hoping we can get that group together for the last time. They've not been together for 6 months, or won't have been by then. And also, we've got a colleague who's retiring after 34 years. That's an enormous amount of service. So these are important things we need to sort of. The next area is a huge amount of anxiety about the summer, because people do need to travel. People need to go and see relations, but they will do so knowing if anybody goes from Hong Kong back to the UK, they're going to possibly quarantine at both ends, quarantine into the UK and quarantine coming back into Hong Kong. So we've had to say to the staff, you need to be back in Hong Kong by the 10th of August in order to be ready for staff inset. And we've actually adapted our staff inset, and we've said actually the first week of inset is actually going to be on Zoom if you can't get into school. So we will so that we can give an extra week, because we're anticipating quite a few people being in quarantine. And then finally, I think there's going to be a sort of lot of fallout from this. Whether it's job losses and dislocation of families and bereavements and so on. And this impact is going to be with us for a while. So I think we're going to have these ongoing well-being issues that we're going to have to deal with over the coming months, and it's going to be a real challenge. Just sort of drawing to a close. I mean, I think. I think schools are going to be the same again. I think we've come to this point now where we say, well, actually, EdTech has come of age. I mean, I'm very interested in the concepts, and I think US Bursars should be as well, is in the whole concept of an education continuity plan. I've been running schools for 20 years now, and we've had a crisis management. I know what's happened if a building burns down, and we've made all the contingency planning about if that block went down, we'd use the gym, or we'd put sort of classrooms on the playground or whatever, and all those sorts of planning. But I don't know of a school that's had an educational continuity plan for this sort of scenario. And I think I think we're going to ask ourselves very differently in the future. Does a snow day have to be a lost day of learning? Because actually we should be able to just flip the switch and move straight seamlessly to the online version of the school. And I think that's going to be quite important going forward, that we will have those in place. The next one is, I think there will be many more meetings to be online. I think I can't see us doing full face-to-face board meetings all the time. I mean, the attendance of students actually in learning, the students at SLT meetings and board meetings and parent-teacher meetings and so on. This is going to be a real change. And I think offering the ability to do meetings online will be something that happens going forward. I think parents are going to have much more respect for teachers going forward. I think they've got a much deeper appreciation of what we do, and I think that, and in many cases or in some cases they realise that actually the teacher was never the problem. It probably was their child after all. That actually it's a very different. They've had to have a relationship with their children in a different context of trying to make them sit down and apply and learn something. That's been new, and I think out of that will be born an enormous respect for teachers. And I think the most important thing is that we will value human contact so much more. I mean, I think But what we're all looking forward to is all getting back together again. Whether it's being in school or going down a pub or being at an ISBA conference, all of those things. The virtual webinar is fine. But it's not. There's something about meeting together and spending time with each other that's really important. I think that's really important. So I said, before that it's a sort of marathon and not a sprint. And I'm very pleased to say that in Hong Kong, the marathon is coming to an end as we get to the finish line. And I wish you all the best in the UK as you find your way to what is. The London Marathon is going to be a very different one to the Hong Kong one, but I wish you all the best. If you want some more information, I've written a number of articles during the course of this, sharing what we've done here in Hong Kong. You can get to them all through my LinkedIn page there. And I've put this presentation onto my blog. I'll just put the link up, and it's already up there. So it's if you track down my alter ego, the Independent Head, or I'll link it from Twitter after this, so that you can have the slides, and I think we'll make the video available as well. So good luck, and see you at the finish line.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. That's been another tour de force of problems that you've faced, and thank you again for being quite so candid. What came through to me very clearly was the whole business of what makes a school a community. That seems to be where you've centered your effort in order to either generate it online or begin to think about regenerating it with pupils returning. I think that's a very good lesson for us all to learn, because it does make a school completely different as an experience, and that I think is what you're trying to recreate. It certainly sounded like it from where I was listening. So we have a couple of questions, and if we start with the technical one, which Edward Valetas put up. He asks, have you had any issues with Zoom? Our safeguarding staff consider there are a number of issues with security, and that is something that we have heard also as an association. Have you anything you want to add to that?
I think, we've got Zoom Pro, we've got the Advanced Pro, and if you go into the back end settings of it, you can set it up that you have to go in via the waiting room and then let people in. So we changed our default settings for the whole organisation so that they would people wouldn't automatically be able to go in, and that therefore they had to be let in to the thing. Now, the only thing you can't account for is, as with all of these security issues, is human error. And the only sort of things that really can get in there, is when somebody walks in behind you. I think one of the great things about Zoom, and we're on WebEx today, but the great thing about Zoom is you can put a virtual background in. So if somebody inadvertently wanders into the sort of rear view mirror, as it were, then you've got a bit of protection from that. And we've seen the stories from around the world of sort of spouses wandering sort of scantily clad past the teacher who's teaching the year 10, and it's funny as long as it's not your school. I think sort of thing. So I think Zoom, if with a virtual background and with those security measures, is as good as you're going to get. And I think one of the articles that I wrote was, which I can whiz back to, is so one of these articles was on the paperwork for home learning, and there are we put an enormous amount of work into the protocols for teachers in terms of teacher behaviour, student behaviour, and parent behaviour. Because there are whole issues around parents sitting in on lessons in a way that they wouldn't normally, and then sort of making complaints about the teacher and all those sorts of things. So we did a lot of work around that, and there's links to that, and I think they've been shared on the ISC website, but you're welcome to have the ISB one as well. But I hope that they're useful to you.
Mark, I'm absolutely certain they will be. There was a question which is really centered on handling staff, management of staff, and particularly some of the HR aspects, because as you will have found and we are finding, there are teachers who can't return to work because of a medical condition, either real or imagined, and also who can't return to work because some part of their childcare setup falls apart or is not available. How have you been handling their colleagues and their sort of integration back into the school if perhaps they're not there when perhaps they should be?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a couple of examples, but I think that one has to approach this whole thing with compassion. You know, I mean, you know, the people are under an enormous amount of stress and strain. You know, and we've got people, on the staff whose parents are, terminally ill and getting near the end, and they just can't get there at all at the moment. And I think, and there are people who have genuinely are frightened about the risk of being infected. And I think that this isn't a time to sort of start rolling out big HR policies. It's also not a time to be rolling out performance management around, I think we have to trust our teachers. I know that one of the questions I was asked on a webinar was, what are you doing in terms of quality assurance, in terms of checking the teachers are teaching good lessons? Well, I'm trusting them because they're a body of professionals who do a good job, and I think I'd err on the side of compassion on these occasions, and then I think these things will sort themselves out. I mean, I know there are schools where they've had cases where in Asia where half the team have been based in the city and half had managed to was still on Chinese New Year and didn't come back, and was sort of half are posting pictures of them and their family still on the beach at Phuket 3 weeks later, and there is going to be a managing of that when you come back, as a body of professionals. But I don't think now's the time to be doing getting into those sort of big HR policies. But I think you have to have a sensible conversation. But people have genuine fears, and I think that would be my starting point.
Okay, if we can turn, and this will be the last question, I promise, and I'll let you off the hook afterwards. It's a question based on basically pupils and their parents' trust in the precautions you've taken. How have you managed, firstly, the precautions, and secondly, the messaging that tells parents how safe the school is to be in for their children?
We're working on the messaging at the moment, but what the stance we've taken with all the way through is to produce video content for difficult conversations, to actually to talk to parents, whether it's an announcement about prolonging it or the announcement that around exams being cancelled and the implications for AS, or the change of the timetable. All of these we've done video messaging. I think you can get across on video a much more, you can get a bit, empathy across much more. So I think it's about saying that we've put these protocols in place, but I think also when they come to school, that there will be, the fact that, there is quite an extensive questionnaire going up before they come back, where they're going to have to make health declarations. But there is a sense in which the community has to trust it, that everyone, the whole way in which you manage a virus is the community has to trust their neighbour. So we need people. There will be an element of trust, but I suspect, within any community, people will know whether people are breaching that trust, and I suspect the WhatsApp groups will be probably more active around sort of policing things than the school will have to be. If somebody knowingly is coming to school and they've got someone in their household who's only just returned from the UK, I mean that's offside. They're going to sign to say that they're not coming in, and then they do. I mean that's that's putting everybody at jeopardy, and I think that's a concern. But I think as a community, there has to be trust within the community in order to do that.
Okay. Mark, thank you very much. On behalf of the attendees, and there have been a considerable number, I didn't track them as they came and went, but most stayed, which is delightful. Thank you very much for another candid scene-setting presentation for us to take our messages from. There are a couple of questions which we will take up afterwards by email, and replies will be forthcoming to those questionnaires. Some are slightly UK-centric and therefore not for you, Mark, to answer. But just a final thank you very much indeed for making yourself available for the second time on this subject.
Always a pleasure. Thank you very much.